this computer. Thank you very much for joining us today, choosing to watch this video. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, effective leadership, probably a little bit about how sometimes leadership goes maybe astray, but a really formal role and informal roles for leadership in team cultures. We're going to go through introductions. I'll introduce myself last. But let's get started with the two gentlemen that are joining us today. Gentlemen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'll start first. My name is Dave Waknuk. I'm the head coach of the University of Lethbridge women's basketball team. I've coached post-secondary women for 16 seasons now, and I'm excited to be here. I think for leadership, that's something we talk about in every team structure that I've dealt with. And I think for me, where I've had sort of my breakthrough moment with leadership recently in the last few years is where I've really understood how it starts with me and how I play a part in leadership. My values, my direction, what's important to me really sets the tone for it. So I think that's something that's really made me think about myself and my role that I have in setting up my leadership that sets up my culture and how it's all connected. So I'm looking forward to kind of dig deeper into that stuff today.
Awesome.
My name is Richard Sylvester. I've been a strength and conditioning coach for about 14 years. Most of that time has been spent working with youth. Currently, I'm pursuing my PhD, studying sprinting and jumping in youth female athletes from Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. For me, leadership, I always think of navigation, and I think this is a term that I learned from Matt Bain himself. So it's not just kind of rolling out and trying to define it for the athletes without them having an input, and basically trying not to just roll it out as this kind of out there term, because we want to basically help the athletes navigate towards positions of leadership, to help the team or to help whatever group that they're working with. So navigation is what I would say.
Awesome. Well, it's a wonderful start. I want to get right into questions, but I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Matt Bain. I'm a mental performance consultant with the Canadian Sports Psychology Association, as well as a registered psychologist. I too am navigating the PhD journey with the University of Queensland, studying personality and motivation and the construction of motivation in elite athletes. And I think when I look at leadership, when we talk about leadership, my curiosity is front and center. I'm always interested to hear how athletes want to lead, how they have led, how they've been led, how coaches have empowered them with leadership, how coaches have not given them direction, they've given them too much direction, everything and anything. And those stories are so valuable when it comes to leadership. And I think we have two experts, I feel like two experts chatting with us today to talk about really, and I use the term periodization, and I know that comes from strength and conditioning, but we want to take that same sort of principled look, that really organized look, that we can take things or constructs that have to do with effective leadership, and we can just look at people and say, okay, that person's a really good communicator, or that person's really, they have people want to be with them, people want to be behind them, they're a leader. But we may not actually be fostering the same kind of skill the way that we would in the weight room, okay, or the way that we would on the pitch or the track or the court. And those kinds of skills are not really, I don't think that they're quite as soft skill as we think. Okay, I've always used the adage that, everybody can make noise with their mouth, but not everybody can communicate. And effective communication is one of those key criteria to good leadership, as both Dave and Rich have just alluded to, is that navigating and helping and fostering that process for someone, or even a construct in a team. So as Dave talked about, it's going to start with him. And if his effective communication or his organization for a culture goes astray, it's going to take his leaders or leadership processes the same way. So we really want to dive in today and talk about, from a big picture of that macro cycle kind of perspective. And we're going to start by, talking to these two about team cultures. And what do you think the criteria are that that structure an effective team culture? What does that look like to the two of you?
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, I will go back to my first point, I guess. Ultimately, I think the culture has to be connected to something bigger. And a lot of times I think it needs to be connected to the leader's vision. And the leader's vision needs to come out of who they are. So as I said, I think one of the most important things I've done as a coach is understand my values clearly, and I know what's important to me. So I think that's the base. That's what everything is tied to. And then from that, I can decide on kind of where I want us to go with collaboration for everyone else. So I really think it comes back and centered and grounded in the values of the leader. And then I think what I've learned too is not only do I need to understand my values, this doesn't mean that it has to be always about me. I'm not going to get them in the room and say, this is important to me, this is for me. That's not the case. I just know what's important from a general philosophy, but I think I'm learning that it also has to be easily communicated. There's plenty of coaches out there that can tell you, well, I have this, giant philosophy, or I have all these ideas, which is great. But if it's not shareable, and if it's not something that can transfer to members in the culture, then it's not really effective. So I think it has to, have a personality. It has to be connected to something for it to be effective.
So then, okay, Rich, talk about your thoughts on that.
Sure. Two things kind of stuck out for me is the values and personality. So what kind of comes through is what does the team value, and who is the team? What is their identity, like as an individual and a group of individuals? So, taking the values, taking their personalities, navigating and then distilling it down to that team culture. So instead of imposing it, it's getting the things that are important, or identifying what's important, identifying who they are, how they like to operate, and distilling it down to some type of team culture, and a way to kind of move forward and use that as a backbone to move forward.
So then, so taking those values, like, give me an example of something where you'd take that macro view of a value, and and how do you take the steps from big picture, looking at it philosophically, down to executable behaviors, so that participants in the program can see its connectedness from one environment to the next, to the next, to the next, rather than it being something unique to just in competition or something like that. Like, what would be an example?
Well, I think identifying it, and then trying to figure out what it means to them. So if you're in a group of athletes and you say, okay, well, what's important to you? Most likely they're going to say something like hard work and being accountable. And so getting an idea of what it actually means to them, what kind of executable behaviors, and if they don't say all the things that you probably feel they should say, kind of leading them to that kind of answer without telling them the answer. So, asking good questions, something like, do you guys feel that showing up on time would be an example of hard work? Or do you guys feel that, letting coach know if you're not going to be here is an example of accountability? Do you guys feel that, having all of your equipment ready to go right at 3 when we start is an example of accountability, responsibility? Mm-hmm. So kind of defining it into something executable, and having them tell you the answer by asking good questions, I think would be a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Matt, I'll give you an example. Like, we talk, a lot of the teams that I've worked with, they essentially want to get along socially. Like, that is a big part of it. They want to enjoy who they're around. So we've taken that and kind of will sort of tease through it, and we came up with the word connection. So that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for connection. And then when we start to define it, we can start to see all the areas. We ask them, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And where is connection happening? And they'll give you examples, and we'll get down to as small as when we put our hands in for our team cheer, we're all touching hands. And that's as small as that is, but that builds back up to the bigger piece of, I feel connected, I feel welcome. So I think it's being able to see, as you said, and Rich said, the small pieces that lead to the bigger vision.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like that the two of you already gone into like behavioral examples, because I think when we're differentiating, we're jumping a little bit, but when we look at, we talk about leadership, that it's almost like an imaginary blanket, right, over the team or over the group, that it doesn't disappear, but it's not like one person has the blanket and goes, I'm the leadership, right? That when you're talking about hard work, it's not just that person's job. Like there's everybody, the expectation is, can be the same for every human. And that's the people part. But I also, you started to address the process and the product of it as well. That the process of it is the questions. The process of it is the curiosity. The process of it is, and as you get into those questions, or you get to hear how they communicate it, how they think about it, and that immediately draws that connectedness, to me anyway, that as established people, they're not just seen as pawns to move around something, right? That as a leader, demonstrating leadership is, as Rich said, I'm going to use Rich's examples, that, your equipment ready to go is, related to your school, related to your strength and conditioning session, related to your nutrition session, related to your training session, they're related to, like, that's not something that's just about practice at 5:15. Right? That's a thing where they're executing that value everywhere and internalizing that value everywhere. And I think that's where team culture has the ability to stretch people and has the ability to give them the opportunity to say, hey, I'm demonstrating leadership via this value, instead of it, well, I'm not a leader, so I'll be in the background. Like, those are two different things to me. So looking at this, okay, so we're talking about how to take leadership as that blanket. So how do you decide what's important in the culture I guess to start to challenge the concept of leadership? What's important in a culture?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, two main points. I think one is listening to your group, and the other one is trusting the experts around your group. So if I'll start with the second one first, trusting the experts. I mean, sometimes that includes yourself. Like, again, as a leader who went through this, you've went through with a lot of proof, so you can trust your instincts on things. But let's say I'm working with Rich and he's my strength coach. I'm going to trust him as an expert to help me lead this through and understand what's important for his side to be successful in the culture. That also means my players can be experts in this area where they have had experience of good teams and bad teams and things. So I'm taking their voice, and that's that first point I made of listening. And if I'm going to ask the questions, I need to listen and I need to take that in. A lot of us will ask questions, but already have an idea of what answers we want to hear. And I think there has to be that connection between the two pieces.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that part about listening, and I'll also add observing to that too, because sometimes you don't have to nominate a leader. Sometimes those leadership qualities are there, and while everyone can't be everything to everyone, there are certain qualities that the team might need. Like there could be an emotional leader, there could be the strategic, tactical leader, and then there could be the irrational confidence, like head first, first through the door type of leader, and the team might need all three of those. So I think elevating those three personalities or those three type of qualities, I think can really help in a group.
Now, both great points. How do you draw out those, I guess, the personality parts of them, so that athletes or members of the group are free to express themselves that way, right? Like that informal hierarchy. I haven't been around long enough. I'm only a second year. I'm a backup. I'm all those sort of informal status things that come along with it, can have someone inhibit those very parts that you're interested in getting and cleaning out. How do you bring those things out in people so that it's not living in just the people part, but it's in the process and the product of leadership in your culture?
Yeah, I believe that you have to, as the leader, you have to build some formal structures to allow people a place to put that opinion and thought where it is. And then you also have to have a mix of informal as well. So there has to be a formal process where, hey, if I have an opinion, I can share it with this group or in this way or this meeting, but in a formal way that I can talk to a coach or leader and I can express my opinion. And people are going to be comfortable in different settings in the informal and formal ways. But I think you have to, as a leader, you've got to build that for people to sort of use. And then it's up to them, or then they're going to hopefully be encouraged by the surroundings to say, oh, okay, this is how you do it. This is who's doing it. This is where we can now share and collaborate and work together. But if you don't set the structure as a leader, then you just hope that somebody speaks up. And I think that's too much to be left by chance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think of giving them a platform to do what they do. And the example I'll think of is a rugby team I worked with in New Zealand. So there were times that we would have what we call the circle of trust. I can't remember if I called it that exactly, but it was basically a time to kind of bring in the troops, and then that kind of like tactical, who's actually like the actual team captain, he would have some closing words for the group. And, you know, that was his platform. That was where he would shine. But then we would have our emotional leader lead off a lot of the warm-ups, and in particular, like the real kind of like fired up warm-up parts. So like it was kind of silly because like for some reason they got really excited about like shoulder rotations. And so the player, we'd always kind of fire it up, say, okay, we're going to start off with some shoulder rotations, and everyone, they get their hands, rubbing together. It's like, okay, boys, let's go shoulder rotations. And it was just energy. So he would always lead and end, the warm up and stuff like that. So he was the emotional leader. So that was his time. And like, don't you dare steal the shoulder rotations from him. And I wouldn't allow it to happen either, because that's his thing. Everybody knew it was his thing, and he was the emotional barometer of the team. So yeah, giving those guys the platform to do what they do, which is what Dave said, that the structure, to allow them to shine.
Now, awesome examples. Yeah, I love those. Are great examples. Okay, can a person or a team or a coach effectively foster those kinds of, be conscious of the importance of those kinds of roles or responsibilities, and can they be developed? Or is it more of an organic process that the culture establishes as that gray space to let athletes find traction, and then a coach kind of being able to call it something? Like, do you know what I mean? Is that I don't think that was very clear. Like, does it have to be as controlled or organized that way? Or can we take that macro view and give the athletes that space so that you can figure out who's going to take on those roles, how they take on those roles? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's the way I prefer it. I do believe it can be developed, but I prefer, like, again, the imagery of that I build the walls and then everyone kind of, feels it out inside the walls. And I think then I have a chance to sort of see it more naturally, more organic is your word, where I believe if you force it and say, you're the leader and now you're going to lead, which I've done in the past, it doesn't take any identity, any of who they are, of what the team represents, and what the leadership represents. It's just sort of a check mark on a box to say, yeah, I'm the leader. Okay, well, what is that? And I think if I can sit back and watch them, and Rich said the word observe, if I can observe them and they can feel out and start to say, oh, this is positive and this has an effect, and I don't think this is going to work with our group. That's where real leadership, for me, natural leadership, comes from. I think the strongest leaders comes from an organic place. You set it up as a coach, but they're allowed to sort of have their personality and their individuality inside the team setting that is controlled by you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would echo that. Yeah, setting it up as the coach, but kind of having a few kind of things in your back pocket, because what you envisioned would happen may not work, and it may organically turn into something else. So I've used circle of trust, as a way to cool down with other groups to create that connection, and and so they'll ask, okay, well, what is circle of trust? I say, well, you just say whatever's on your mind, and which could turn into us talking about our favorite song, which could turn into someone leading a stretch. It could turn into whatever they want to turn it into. And then maybe you address it at a later time, and you say, hey, do you think we should do this every time? Like, someone lead a stretch every time, this, and they might say, yes, like I love stretching after. Okay, sweet. This will be our thing. So I think organically it really sticks better, if you set it up and then they kind of take it somewhere and you're listening, observing, and then you can kind of reaffirm that at a later date.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that lends itself to, I don't want to call it the coach and understanding the climate they're wanting to establish, right? And say, for instance, even what the two of you were saying, there might be some coaches that would be really nervous about the not having the control, right? So using the analogy that Dave used is, I'll build the walls, and then some coaches be like, okay, yeah, but where are they going to sit? I'll be at the front, and then this will be how, and I've got my stuff, so I've got to get this stuff across, and these guys got to understand. So there's the gamut of people who might be uncomfortable with I use the term independence, or seemingly almost operating with impunity. But what you're saying, the two of you are saying, is that the four walls and then the space is deliberate. It's not uncontrolled, it's still deliberate. And by being confident in saying, hard work is going to be what our mantra is on this team, I want to see hard work in the first 15 minutes of our team meetings to see how things go, right? And I'm not going to see how things go as far as like not controlled or those kinds of things, but as a sports psych, I love experiential activities. I establish something and then I go, okay, let's see where this goes. And that can be really uncomfortable. It's like, what criteria you're aiming for? It all comes across as team building. Nope. It all has an element of team building, but rarely is the purpose team building. To me, that team building is the second that you're on the team to the second you're off the team. That I don't just have to do this deliberate 1 hour session on team building, because you have that culture in mind. You have those values in mind. You have the confidence to observe. You have the confidence to communicate. And then you also have the confidence and the curiosity to allow the conversation to occur, right? Like Rich, you were saying, like, having an athlete say, well, can we do this after every single session, right? You could, no, no, it's cutting into my time. But the value of that is you are actually demonstrating the very leadership behavior you want them to demonstrate, right? You're modeling it right there. And then they, curiosity, and then their voice gets stronger. And as Dave was saying, the voice getting stronger means that you're going to see more of that personality. You're going to see them express themselves. And then you can kind of go, okay, this is kind of cool over here, and almost task them with different leadership responsibilities over time. And then over time could be a week. It doesn't have to be years, but this is what you're establishing is that culture and that climate within your program, right? So differentiate then between leadership and leaders, right? You hear these terms all the time, and they're used ambiguously, I think sometimes. So what do those two terms mean for you two?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to what Rich already talked about, where I think leadership and leaders, like leaders can be leaders in different areas. And he talked about, the social leader and the different types of leaders. And I think for me, like, I think that leadership connects all the pieces and leaders execute in those areas. So leadership is kind of the whole value of it. And then the leaders are the ones that are going to execute in, I'm leading in the social area, or I'm leading in this technical area, wherever I'm leading. And I think they don't have that way. Leaders don't have to be the all knowing, all answering person. They're connected to something bigger, which is a collective leadership, which then doesn't mean that they have to have every answer, make every decision, because no one is that comfortable to do it. So now you're connected to a bigger thought process, or bigger philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, leadership being that philosophy that anybody can execute it at any time, and yeah, a leader could be one of those people, and it could be the value that everyone needs at that time. And usually it falls into something formal. We feel we have to, okay, you're the leader, you're the captain, but I think people can display leadership all the time, everywhere.
And so then one of the things that I like to kind of impart with teams and cultures that I work with is the second that you have an identified sort of circumstance where the coach or the strength coach or the athletic therapist or assistant coach, like all of those moving parts, all of those people are demonstrating leadership behaviors, and hopefully they're effective. And I hear this all the time. It's like, I think the most important thing I can do is to lead by example. And then I always follow that with, how do the people who are following you know what they're looking at? And so to me, it's always important to train your replacement, right? If you have even if it's a formally assigned leadership role, or like you were saying, emotional leaders, is then that person becomes aware of, scanning the environment and going, okay, who is going to be that mentee in a sense, right? How can I effectively, impart this philosophical value, so to speak, like hard work, or the being the emotional leader, like that's my time to shine, but I want to pull someone else in, right? So that to me is always a bridge between leadership and leaders as well, is that they are conscious of others, right? That perspective taking. If you're in a position to demonstrate leadership, how can I be stuck inside myself then, right? And in order to get that personality to express, that person to express that side of themselves, it can be really great to say, what does that modeling look like for someone else, so that now it's conscious, right? What's an example that either one of you have seen where that almost happened, whether it was like naturally, organically, or whether it was a formal process for someone that they just bridged it to another person? Can you think of one?
Well, I think what you like at that point really resonated with me, Matt. I think the best leaders are the ones that can kind of, if you think of your cell phone screen, that can kind of zoom out and pinch out, and not always just pinch in and just see the close thing. And I think for me, like, I've had a team of seniors the last couple of years, and them to understand legacy, and now to connect the dots of legacy of, hey, we've built this. I want to see this continue. I want to connect this to the next generation or the next people, so it does all the work we've put in, we don't lose it. That's where you can see people like stop looking internal, stop looking on that zoomed in screen, and start to pull out and zoom out and say, oh wait, this is the impact that I've had, that we've had, that we can have, and now there's more purpose for it, and now there's just this kind of fire that's in that athlete. So I think legacy and understanding the importance of that, when athletes get that, I think it's a major impact on a good culture.
I like digging into the why. So any kind of strategy that that we're using, or we're trying to any idea we're trying to spread, telling them why. It could be in front of a whiteboard, it could be in the huddle, whatever it is, asking them, hey, do you know why that we do this? Do you know why that we say, tell people something good as well as correct them. It's not just negative, like old school, like, hey, like, do better. It's catching people doing something positive that we would want to do as a coach, but we're trying to get the athletes to do that as well. And yes, and then really digging into that why, like, hey, do you guys know why that we do it this way and not this way? Because they may not know, like, we may have done it a certain way, and you haven't really stopped and said, hey, like, this is why we do it, this is why it's important, and this is how we're going to kind of carry forward, and this is the end goal for that.
So then I guess that's a natural segue to that is using that why or using that legacy part, because those aren't people things, those are process and products, right? The communication or the effectiveness of communication, the curiosity of asking and checking with people, is the growth of people and growth of perspective taking. Then what's the difference then between accountability then and responsibility? What's the difference between those two terms when it comes to the constructs that the two of you just mentioned?
I think, and I could be off on this, but for me, like I feel that responsibility is more personal, where accountability and more internal a little bit, where I have a responsibility. Accountability, I often see that word misused where it's external. It's like, you've got to be accountable to me. Why are, I'm going to hold you accountable. And it's outward, and where responsibility, I think, is more inward. I'm responsible for this to connect to the whole group. So that's how I take it.
Yeah, I like that. Like, I'm responsible for this, and this. I'm accountable to, but I think the responsible for will take you further. I think it has a bigger impact because it comes back to some of those daily doables and things you do for yourself, things you do to move the team forward, and I think it has a bigger impact than accountable to. Accountable to me kind of means I'm doing it out of fear of some type of being in trouble, or I'm accountable to my teammate, where being responsible for something automatically means that it's something that's is important inherently.
So as though that's the responsibility is the adoption or the internalization of that value for someone, that they take that responsibility and by owning it, by saying legacy is important to me. Legacy is not just important, it's important to me. And then by taking that responsibility for it, now it goes to others around. And it's that communication piece that the two of you mentioned right off the bat. I think also the observation piece that Rich mentioned is that you're not quietly leading, you're always leading, and you're just quietly observing things. And if I'm stuck inside myself, like you said, fearing, if we don't do this well, we won't maintain the hard work or the legacy of it. Or I think sometimes even the term accountable is the misuse of that why that you were talking about, right? It's I'm not going to ask you, I'm going to tell you. And here's why we do it. We're accountable to this. Or Dave said, you're accountable to me. This is my philosophy. And so I think that when we separate those two things, you start to kind of ingrain or internalize the success for the person, and then they can take that achievement and build it from there. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think so. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to say we're not misusing the term, but the term says, is the term accountable above or below the values? Would it be in a hierarchical place, or would it be like a circle around everything? Where would it fit?
Yeah, I see it as a connected piece around everything. I think that it connects things to it, I think.
So then it's then, oh, sorry, Rich, go ahead.
No, I'm just taking that in. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say then the idea of accountability is beyond people then. It's process and product. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
So the people, oh, go on, sorry.
Yeah, I would, yeah, like Dave said, that overall connecting piece, but I think what you can immediately reach out for is the responsibility piece, is how I would see it.
So it's like the responsibility is the how of accountability, almost. So we're accountable for these principles within the culture, and how we do them is the responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the process, for sure.
Yeah.
The process of accountability.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I mean, this is just something that came up to me. what does the term then hold someone accountable mean in the sense of it being beyond people? How does that fit with leadership?
I would say almost like a reminder of the values, a reminder of, how things are done. But kind of in a build up type of way, and not a negative type of way. I think that communication piece is super important, how it's delivered. I think holding someone accountable could be seen by some as almost like a threat, or like a negative attack, where I think that's not the best way to do it. Not to say that you're not going to be honest, but I think it still has to be delivered in a positive, constructive way. Like I'm not a yeller, but I'll always tell the truth. Like the brutal truth. But I think how it's delivered is super important. And I think you can hold someone accountable without being threatening or super negative, but you still have to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Dave, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I think it's I agree with Rich. I think it's the it's the how of the message, the tone of the message. But I really do think I keep going back to that responsibility piece being there's more ownership to it. There's more personal connection to it than accountability, which, like I said, can be placed or blamed or put on somebody. So I think of it as more of an internal view than the external view of accountability.
Could this be almost like a litmus test for how strong a culture could be then? Because if what you're saying is that the culture would be the thing that the players and the staff would feel is above themselves, and as a result, really any player within the culture can bring that up, can bring up the responsibility, because there's degrees of responsibility to me. Right? Like you said, Rich, like if somebody decided to try to, kind of wedge into that emotional leader's role of like getting everybody energetic about shoulder rotations and stuff, there would be you'd step in. It unlikely would happen, but it sounds to me like it's a pretty strong role in this team, but you would have stepped in and said, it's important that this not lies with this person, but this is process. It's bigger than the person. That responsibility, that other player maybe can't see it yet, just likes the status of everybody paying attention to them or something like that. Whereas you'd be protective of the process and the product.
Yeah, I think you have to do a lot of groundwork at the beginning, establishing what's important and getting them to dictate what's important and packaging that into something. And I think that kind of culture idea, if I were to use that as the overall kind of, value system and how you operate day to day, I think that is almost more important than your daily X's and O's, as an example. Like before I start caring about, we're going to do squats as our main exercise and we're going to do bench press, like before I care about any of that, I care how we operate and them understanding why we're doing it, and understanding the culture, the values, and the what's required for fun and success and safety and all the other things that are important. And make a point of building up that structure and still working hard, but it's kind of the exact exercises are secondary to how we're operating. So as an example, we might say we might make a huge point of, of being on time, or may make a huge point of starting the exercise right away, instead of being the guy who's lagging behind, really like just taking the time, to establish that. And then down the line, it doesn't have to be this huge swing of holding people accountable or, or responsible. It's just a gentle reminder, if a guy is not performing, it's just a gentle like tap on the shoulder by one of his teammates or one of her teammates and saying, hey, like, let's get up, let's do this, instead of like, F you, like, get the F up type of thing. It's just a gentle nudge back on the path that you've established already. Like you've laid out the path, or you've helped them lay out the path for where they want to go. And, so they can kind of just gently nudge themselves back. And you've already taught them how to do all this. You're helping them communicate with each other. You're helping them with all the things they're responsible for. So I think it's an easier play to have that gentle nudge, rather than every time something goes wrong, you have to take this huge swing and it's this huge deal. I don't think I don't think it'll last. I don't think the culture is strong if you have to take those huge swings.
Yeah, and Matt, I think that's a great point by Rich, and I really think the most important part is like you have that base. That's where we talked about the start of this, was it has to be true to yourself, your values, and to your team's values. So I'll tell you a quick story that kind of came into my mind. I worked with the staff, and communication was the value. So communication was going to be the focus for the team. It was going to be so important to hear the player's voice, the coaching staff, and that was the value. So, but the structure wasn't set right, where the leaders, the coach in this situation, his idea of communication was different than the leaders, and it was a different structure. So he would pull in the leaders after a practice, which would be 2 people, and say, okay, so when do you want to practice tomorrow? Where do you want to go for that team meal? Well, they were put on spot to make that decision. So they kept making that decision because that's what was asked of them. But there wasn't really a way to explain how that communication, is connected to the group, and how they hold each other accountable for the correct information to go through, and all these parts that were important to it. The coach said, hey, we need a player's voice. I'm getting a player's voice. So they would come back and they would hit home every day. Hey, this communication is important. It's a big part of our team. I need to hear players' voices, and we are, and we're doing this because this is what the team wants. But the team wasn't connected to the leadership, and it was a broken channel of communication. So it built resentment. It built where the team started to say, oh, it's just what the leaders want. The leaders felt like they were put in a tough spot by the coaching staff and had no connection to the team. And now the intention was great, but because it wasn't rooted in what was actually important, the accountability, the responsibility, it just didn't connect anything. So it actually did way more damage if we just wouldn't have had any communication than us doing it where it wasn't really rooted in the truth and what was actually important to the team.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, is like being a strength coach. I think it's important not to impose your ideals. Like obviously you have your own philosophies and principles, but in a team sport, knowing what the head coach wants to get across and taking that value and navigating the players towards that. It's like, hey guys, what are some of the things that coach says in practice? Like how about in this situation? Like how do you feel that he communicates this, and blah 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 blah, and getting them to verbalize that, and then using that message, like Dave was saying, like taking that value and having that as as the thing that's holding things together. So a quick story is, so this the same rugby team, connection and was one of our values. So every day when they do their warm-up lap, for whatever you feel about warm-up laps, like maybe they've gone by the wayside, in contemporary strength and conditioning. But the point of that warm-up lap was to stay an arm's length away from each player, and like never letting someone fall behind, so that was, so that's what I heard. Okay, hey, someone's falling behind, 1 arm's length, So that was, what we hammered home, boom, boom, boom. And setting up the workouts in the morning, it was groups of 3 and 4. And the reason for that is rugby, the way that they're playing in these kind of offensive pod systems. So basically they'd be in groups of 3 across the field. So it'd be a group of 3 on the left, a group of 3 in the middle left, a group of 3 on the middle right, group of 3 on the far right. And they kind of like travel up and down the field together. So it's super important for those pods to be connected and to be together and executing together. So I wanted to reinforce that idea from the coach that, hey, we're in a group, execute as a mini group, connect, work together, collaboration. And then to kind of bring that idea home with a little bit of fun, we'd always end with some type of connecting, fun type of activity, which was like, we called it the war bell. And I think you gave me this idea, or you helped me with this idea. It was basically like a cowbell, and it was to tell us basically like give a reflection to the group of how hard they worked that day, which was one piece of it. But then the second piece was everyone was crowded around and everyone was clapping, yelling, and someone would stand in the middle, make a bunch of noise and hit the bell for a certain number of times depending on how hard they worked. So there's always that piece, but then there was also some type of like crazy fun, changed every day type of piece where one day we could be okay, everyone show me their double Dutch. One day it was like one-on-one with the med ball on top of the chin-up rack. It could be best dance moves. It could be best chant, so there's all these like connecting energy pieces to that, so we hit that connection piece in all different aspects of their experience in the team. So in practice, in games, strength and conditioning, all of it. So we just kind of hammered that message that was from the coach. So I think it's important as a strength coach to echo that piece in all aspects.
Well, and so that bridges really well to the idea of I know it's like planning, right? To me, that's what really resonated for me as a coach, resonated for me to understand in training. Like I always wanted to know what the strength coach was doing. And when I was coaching, I wanted everybody on the staff to know what I was doing at this level and what my strength coaches were doing. And I always just wanted to know, because like you said, like connectedness, it's not like, okay, connectedness, we're going to be a team because we all wore the same stuff. Right, that like it's great, like awesome. I mean, everybody's got really nice gear, but the idea of connectedness is like, how do we want to foster this? Right, what does that look like? And the two examples that you guys is like communication and connectedness. Connectedness comes from communication. Communication strengthened by connectedness, and verbal and nonverbal. It's not just making noise with your mouth. So, how do you take something like that and well, would you, maybe you wouldn't, but would you put in any sort of evaluation, like a benchmark? So like you said, like if you've got this macro, meso, and micro cycle, you got this week is going to be super intense for strength. We don't have a competition for the next 14 or 13 days, right? Whatever, how do we evaluate our effectiveness for something like that? Or would you? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think evaluation is very important because it's going to help you realize if you're on track or if things are starting to get away from what your original plan was. And I think I go back to the terms I used already. I think there's informal evaluation and there's formal evaluation. So like we will use, for example, an idea that I saw from an MBA coach actually in one of the clinics this summer was we started to do, so we have a year-end survey and we'll ask everybody, how was everything? How was your culture? How was everything going? But we'll do that 3 times during the year. So we'll do it after exhibition, we'll do it halfway through, and we'll do it at the end because we want to know, we're going to ask the same questions all the way through because we want to know where are we in these areas. And there's going to be a leadership meeting, where I'm going to have them once every couple of weeks. So there's going to be that formal setup where there's feedback collected formally. But I also think there has to be a chance to check in with people. And like I said at the start, kind of trust the experts and ask them just informally, hey, how are things going? Where are we at? How do you feel? What are the challenges? And you'll be surprised with the real feedback in a culture of trust where everybody understands it, the real feedback you can get from just having a 30-second conversation in the hallway. And I think that's, so I use a mixture of both, but that's what I said at the very start. I think there has to be the structure set up so that if I'm someone that's better in casual conversation to express where I'm at, great. But if I'm someone that's better in a formal setting, then I can go that way too. But I think evaluation is crucial because otherwise you may just be running into a brick wall with no idea that it's coming.
Yeah, I would say I'm partial to the informal part of things, just from a time standpoint. Won't always, the situations I've been in don't always call for having the time to do something formal, but definitely something informal. And I've kind of leaned into my increasing age in the industry, and so we have these little chats, these informal reflection periods, and I call them Uncle Rich time. And so I say, guys, this Uncle Rich time is time where we kind of huddle. I ask you guys questions, we reflect on things, and it's usually something that's has to do with you and your safety and your well-being. Because I care about you as people. We're here to work hard, learn some sports skills, some lifting skills, but there's also life skills that this environment is set up to teach as well. So that's what Uncle Rich time is for. And so today we're going to talk about, it could be whatever, like it's been growth and maturation has been one of the topics of Uncle Rich time. Even as simple as being on time, anything culture wise, how things are going. Like, do you guys feel you're doing a good job of this? Do you feel like I'm doing a good job of this? Any kind of informal type of reflection is what Uncle Rich time is for.
I feel like that builds like all the way back up to values, doesn't it? Like that just resonated for me in a level of, effectively communicating with people, but telling them that you care about them and then showing them that you do. That's what you're trying to model in getting others to start to care and perspective take, right? Like, how does it look? Well, he really seems to care about us. Well, can you care about others? Like, it's not, to me, that's effective, people skills, but it's also good. If I'm going to be in a leadership role or I'm going to be challenged or tasked with leadership, then I'm really, it's the people part that it's going to have to start with. So then if I go all the way back up to values and connectedness, not only are you physically connected, you're emotionally connected, you're increasing awareness for reflective skills, you're feeling valued, you're feeling heard. I'm going to run out of fingers, but I just think like when you just talk about like little things like that can be planned if a coach turns to Rich and says like, hey, what's your ideal environment, right? And Rich says to the coach, what are the things you want to see from my environment? And then there's the autonomy of that experts piece that Dave was alluding to in my head is like, I'm going to trust the experts, but I want the experts to plan something, not just show up and hang out. Like, let me know what we're doing so that I can connect to it too, right? Or that I can make sure that communication is effective. We're using the same language, and then they don't come up, yeah, Uncle Rich time, coach knows exactly what's going on with Uncle Rich time because Uncle Rich has started to connect that piece to them as well, right? It's a deliberate connectedness activity that informally helps to get and foster that evaluation piece, right?
Yeah,
Sorry, soapbox. Go, Dave.
Where planning becomes so important. Where I believe that, like with an IST team, like you have to plan beside them, right? And if I was a coach and I had Rich, I wouldn't need a detailed layout of what his time with the athletes was going to be as conversation was. But if I knew that that's what he was going to do, and he knew that in my plan that he had access to, that I value being on time, or we value connection, whatever it is, now we're aligned. And but I think for that planning, I think I used to always just plan in a silo, right? I'm going to have my plan and here I'm going to go and I'll tell you what you need to know. But I've changed my mind over the years where my plans are open. My strength coach and I, we plan together. Our YTPs are actually on the same document. We'll work together alongside. We'll have meetings before we put the YTP together. Same thing if I'm working with a sports psych or a physio or whoever else, nutrition. And then what I've started to do too is I've included my athletes into it. Give me some feedback on where we want to go, and then take a look. And again, you may not understand my YTP or whatever it is, but you'll have a better sense of where we're going to go. And now I can give people around me autonomy in that, build the walls and the space in between, because they understand what the walls are. They understand what the structure stands for and what it values. Now they're free to kind of go explore that space, and it's fun and exciting for people that want to buy into that. And then I bet those people in those moments with Uncle Rich time, it's like, that's a fun part, because there's structure, but there's not really structure, and there's a chance to explore and to grow and to connect and all these things that as coaches we die to plan, but sometimes we can't script exactly the way it's going to be. We need to just put that structure there so it happens organically, all the way back to what we talked about at the start.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, and making that connection between those the behaviors that that they should be displaying, or that they feel they will lead to success, and connecting it to to something tangible, and say, hey, do being prepared, the benefits of being prepared, the benefits of being here on time, the benefits of sleeping well, the benefits of doing these exercises that we're doing, making that connection to the success part, I think is important. And I think especially with kids, they hear you, and like if you kind of you keep on saying the right messages, and they hear you, they just sometimes it just takes them a while to really internalize it, but they definitely hear you. When you check back and they say, oh, well, you said that blah 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 blah. You're like, oh, you always say that blah 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 blah. Oh, you always preach about the details. Oh, you always preach about this. So I think just constantly reminding them, and then coming back to those values is important.
But and I just to bridge that to where reading about that peer-to-peer contact and coach to athlete contact is one of the things that comes up in the literature is called relation informed self-efficacy, and it's someone's belief in the efficacy or the confidence that someone else has in me. And Dave talked about it with his experts, and the players having it for one another, and it's not simply in a place of whether I'm good at shooting the three, right? But that's an important part of it. I can have a sense of self-efficacy for that. My teammates, they go, oh, that's her thing. But the confidence that she has, that they see that in her, right? Not just that others know that about it. That to me is like that. It's a strengthening or a fostering of the communication, the connectedness. That's where those values live, right? Is how confident am I in, for that person's belief in me. And that Uncle Rich times, like, I'm just going to go back to it, is like prime example of degrees of trust, right? Rich asked us about, growth today. And, someone goes, well, yeah, it's important. And then the next person beside was like, this has sucked. Like, I grew 3 inches and now I feel like I can't run, I can't walk, I'm stumbling all over the place. And, you get really different degrees of trust. That also allows you to say, hey, like, to both of those people, what are you growing? Right? What are you growing in this circle? What are you growing in Uncle Rich time? Because that's within one another as well, which transfers to the pitch, which transfers to the court, which transfers to all of those skills transfer somewhere else. We always get asked, like, how do I get my athletes to be more confident? right? And that's one of the best ways to do it, is that that person has confidence in me. How? Right? There's leadership to me. There's one of the examples of cornerstones of leadership, is that person who's executing that leadership behavior is not inside themselves, right? I'm great. I'm awesome. Good for you. That doesn't make you a leader, right? That doesn't actually show you anything about leadership. You may have an informal leadership role based on your competencies, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a leader or has any skill in that domain. And that's typically how a lot of youth sports go. The person's really good. Well, she's the captain then. What? It's not the same at all, right? But I think that that comes from where this discussion is coming from, is if I don't know how to program this, if I don't know how to organize this, and if I don't know how to set the walls up, then the voice of leadership can disappear and just go over there because that person's really good at the sport, or go over there because they're super strong or they're popular, right? That doesn't necessarily mean leadership. That means competency, popularity, or strength, right? And I think that that's where coaches, strength coaches, organizing that culture and accountability can increase the leadership competencies the same way we can in the other domains, right? So then, and I use this term like it's empowerment. Is it an overused term? And if it is it an underused term? Like, how is it best used as far as effectively, so that an athlete or athletes in a program understand what it means?
Yeah, for me, empowerment's one of my core values. I think it's a very important word because I think there's an understanding of sort of, you know, the power that's obviously in that word that the athlete has. And I think if there's any flaw, you know, when you ask me this question, if there's any flaw in it, maybe I think more of, you know, like that I prefer empowering instead of empowerment, because it's not like you're empowered and it's done. You know, I think it's empowering is like giving them, from my position as a leader, I'm giving them the platform to keep empowering them, to keep building them. It's not a sort of a, you know, I check the box and I'm done. So that's where my head goes with it. But I do think it's a powerful term. I do think it's used a lot. I don't know that it's always I don't know that it's always understood from everybody in there. You know, you always, if you look around, say job applications and postings, people will always talk about how they want, you know, student athlete empowerment is part of their culture. But I don't really know if they understand what that really looks like to them, or if the student athletes in my setting really understand what that is. Like, I don't know that it's defined well.
For me, it comes, it kind of reminds me of autonomy. So autonomy not being just, hey, they can do whatever they want, but they're having an informed choice. And I think, you know, there's a certain way you can earn empowerment, or, you know, being empowered, and I think there has to be some type of you know, education piece, you know, some type of navigation piece to it. You know, when you've empowered someone to do something, you know, I think that's super important, rather than just kind of throwing them out there and be like, okay, yeah, you do this. That's what I think of.
Those are great points. It's not that all or nothing thing, right? I have total control, or you have it. You operate with impunity, right? There's the values piece that I think both of you just hammered home, is if there's going to be this sense of connectedness, and it's something that you're willing to see if an athlete can do something effectively, like whether it's, you know, they're curious for communication styles or strategies or conflict resolution. They're curious for you know, educating the team culture in certain areas. Like, I think of like the nutrition, you know, as a really good example, is like effectively taking nutrition. You know, again, everybody knows what food is, but not everybody knows how to use it, right? And so you know, taking an athlete who says, you know, this is something that I'm really interested in and being curious, is like, well, how can this help connect our culture? How can this help connect or draw connectedness? Because that part's part of our culture. But then not just going, yeah, you do it, and we'll see you later, right? That there's deliberate education, there's deliberate attention, there's deliberate importance and value placed on it as well. That's what I gleaned from both of you. I get really excited hearing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I heard a quote this week actually in a group that I was working with, and they talked. The quote was that a way to grow that, and what you kind of talked about, is take coach requests from players and turn that into leadership challenges. So everyone will say, "Hey, coach, we should have a team dinner. Hey, coach, we should learn more about nutrition," and then take that, phrase that back, and say, "Okay, let's do it. Let's have you lead it. You take us there and I'll help you get there." And I think that's an interesting way to look at it, but a quick way for a coach to say, okay, these things now can help build our leadership and connect to a bigger platform. So I thought that was a neat a way to look at it.
I like that. Because sometimes things come up, like before an athlete fully trusts you, they give you a window into their soul, a window into what they're thinking, and you can take that opportunity and grow it. Like you're saying, if someone asks you something like, "Hey, like, why do we do this?" Like, "Oh, hey, I think this would be a good idea," and then you pull them all in and you say, "Hey, like, I think Matt brings up a good point. He was suggested this. I think that's fantastic. How do you guys feel about this? Or what are some other ideas that you feel about this?" And you kind of grow that curiosity into something, and then you're kind of stacking up those victories. Just looking for those small opportunities, those small windows where they're letting you in, and then growing that, I think, is important.
Those are real gifts. Those windows, we can call them risks. I like to call them initiatives. Where an athlete, puts that out there, and then, like Rich just said, lots of questions, curiosity from you fosters that. Oh, great. Now we just executed connectedness. You don't have to say that. You just feel it, right? And in feeling it, now you've got more and more of the very buy-in that I hear all the time. And my adage is always like, okay, well, you want better buy-in, but does everybody understand what it is that you're selling? Right? Because if I want great buy-in, I want total buy-in from someone, and I walk onto a car lot and there's 1,000 trucks, you've got tons of choice. How come they're all blue? Well, there's tons of choices of blue trucks. Well, I don't have a lot of choice then. And are they all the same? Yes, they're all the same brand as well. But there's thousands. You can go around and choose. That's not autonomy, right? And it said, like, this is what I'm selling. You need to buy in. It's like, but I don't want a blue Ford F-150. What about a red one? Excellent. Whatever you decide to imagine it can be. It's just going to be blue, right? It goes back to the Henry Ford art. You can have whatever color you want as long as it's black when he put out the Model T, right? And it's just like, okay, so wait a minute here. How does that form a culture if I'm going to be the one who's going to be giving you all of those options? You have thousands of ways to do it, but I don't. I just go from this to this to this, and it all seems the same, right? That doesn't foster that leadership skill at all.
And I think, Matt, a point that I think about as a coach is a lot, because we talked a lot about defining what things are for people to buy into. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, again, a coach with the intention's right. Hey, I'm going to put it on a PowerPoint. I'm going to show you what it is. I'm going to write out the words, and here's what it is. But to make that real, you have to demonstrate it. That is the missing gap, I think, for how do you, we kept saying, like, make it clear, make it clear. Well, the words are one part of it, but the example, the actually doing it over and over and over, and that's the clearest way to do it. I think that took me a long time as a coach to really understand, because I would say what every coach says, well, I told them what to do. I told them what this means, but that means nothing. That means nothing if you're not living it, showing it, pointing it out, celebrating when it happens, putting all that out there. Now that's where the connection piece. So I think that's where that for me is the big takeaway in this topic.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, like the living it and demonstrating it, I think we underestimate when our coaching job starts and finishes. Like if you have a 60-minute session, that's probably 50% of it, maybe 60% of it. Like, but you might there might be 10 to 15 minutes when they arrive before, when you could be out there connecting. It doesn't have to be anything cheesy, but they could be asking you questions, and then that's another chance to connect. You could be out there doing a little stretch. You could be out there, encouraging some of the things that they're already doing. They might be out there, playing rock, paper, scissors, kicking a ball against the wall. It might be stuff that you're encouraging there. After the session, there's, there could be another 10 to 20 minutes you're connecting. And I think all of that matters, and all of that, if you just stay locked in before and after, I think is super important. And I notice like a lot of young strength coaches miss that part. Whenever I'm doing some type of internship, the younger coaches are staying, say, in the coach's room up until 2 minutes before the session, but then you're missing, if there's people there 20 minutes before, you're missing a valuable window to connect that's going to make your job so much easier in the end, to kind of hammer home those values.
I'll give an example too, because once upon a time we all worked in one building, and I think when you talk about that, Rich, I remember, having the strength coach yourself, being there early, and the small thing of having your door open. And I always remember walking by Rich's office and the door is open. And as small as that is, if I'm an athlete and I'm there and I need to check in or just say, hey, what's up to Rich? His door is open. And I've worked in plenty of places where people say, yeah, no one really comes and connects with me. Like, your door's closed. You're not out there early, or you're not actually, physically there. And something as small as that can send a strong message to the culture of, yeah, come on in, come talk to me. Let's chat, let's get started. So
I want to draw attention. I want to use a Rich example as well. And I don't even know at the time, I don't think Rich even realized what he was doing. He was just having fun. But I remember the one of the teams, he had them record a lip sync. And just out of just the sheer humor of it, the team, did this. And I can't remember even what the premise of it was. But like, when we talk about program connectedness, it was just like, here's this strength coach who's just really into dancing and music and like having a personal relationship with almost everybody, where this kind of wild demonstration of initiative is almost like, other teams are looking over how come they're doing that? What are we, how come they're doing that? And it's almost like this curiosity. There's nothing to do with sport. And then all of a sudden there's these videos that are just posted. It's like, well, here comes this team challenge. Like, this is what we're doing. And it just kept going better and better and better. And I remember having a conversation with you about that. It's like, do you realize what you did? Or was just like, just standing there watching the video, like, no. It's just, that's how powerful this personality was. It's just, Rich is just touching all these lives and how connected they were. But it was so fun to watch these athletes demonstrate varying degrees of initiative in this space. And I thought, do you realize how strong the leadership role is of a strength coach, and how this is a strength coach? It's not on the job description, was it? Right?
No.
There's not.
Singing Adele lip sync battles. Yeah.
And if it wasn't the year before, I'm sure it was the next year, because there's this connectedness, this leadership that people didn't really see, or it wasn't the responsibility of the strength coach. But now you've got 120 plus varsity athletes all connected. They're all connected, and they're all connected in an informal way, in a really fun, demonstrable way, that each team had those people that were, the extroverts, the performers, and then sort of the more introverted people still got to hide behind. But teams had to cultivate these things for themselves. And it just took on a life of its own. And that was a really, really cool shift, where I was watching, standing side by side with Rich, watching this stuff go on. And and noticing just as strong a personality as Rich had, and the outcome of it, right? That to me, there's no position description point, and yet 120 athletes are now directly connected and plugged into the entire program, all through the activities of one person here. And that's just one of hundreds of examples that I've seen really effectively delivering the very thing we're talking about, right? Is from team culture all the way down to Adele lip sync battles, you know, and it's like you couldn't get varsity athletes to do much without, like, with this, you have to be here at this time and this time and this time. Oh, by the way, we're doing an Adele lip sync battle in the gym at 12. What? Right? Like there was no forcing. It was completely autonomous. Right.
And that's where I think the characteristic of vulnerability in leadership is key, right? Because that's where relationships come from. And I think, you know, I heard Brene Brown quote one time say that in looking at relationships, vulnerability is the first thing we look for, but the last thing we want to show, right? And I think that's the human element of this. So that's the connection piece, the vulnerability. I think as a young coach, I thought I had to be a certain way. I've got to my way or the highway. I'm going to just make this happen. And you know, you didn't want to share anything. You didn't want to give anything. Why? Because I guess you just thought that was the way you were supposed to coach. But you see the power in it when I can show vulnerability. I can show flaws. I can show the human side of it. That's where the relationship really connects in that culture and everything goes together. So I think that's a great example of that, how powerful that characteristic is.
Yeah, and I think I would add too, I think sometimes we need to reframe what training is. And, you know, like, you know, while it's not just the physical parts, you know, even though that's you know in my job description, but there's a lot of mental skills too that will help the physical, that will help the actual sport performance. And you know, and so training, it's the physical, it's the mental. Training is also the recovery. You know, I treat recovery as training sessions, but then, you know, all the, like, anything that reinforces values and any kind of life skills, you know, assertiveness, connectedness, communication, that's all training, you know. So I can't even remember how the lip sync battle happened, but I know it's a good recovery, you know, because we're not, you know, it could have been a week that that they were just absolutely spent, or it could have been a bye week or something. I can't remember, but they're building connectedness, assertiveness, you know, vulnerability, because you're performing, you know, in front of everyone else. It's building all of that and adding to their recovery, you know, and it's also a little bit of competition too, because it got quite serious, you know, because we had, you know, like we had Barb at the desk, you know, comment as a judge, and I think Matt Clegg as a judge, and everyone got involved, and then the winning team was happy, the losing team was just, you know, the you know, questioning the judging integrity. Like it was it got quite competitive, you know. But yeah, I think training is everything that makes an athlete better. So as long as you're ticking at least one of those boxes, I think is an important way to kind of move forward.
Well, so again, it's maybe bridging to kind of our last topic, and I think it's a big topic, could be a topic in and of itself, but I always feel like the measure of leadership is effective followership. And when the followership term, I remember using this term with the team a few years ago, and in a coach session, and I got a phone call afterwards and said, we're getting rid of that. You know, we don't train followers here. And I said, what you heard me say was a follower? And he said, yeah, no, we don't train followers, we train leaders. And I said, what are you meaning by that? And it's like, you know, he felt there was passive people who were just accepting and, you know, blindly following and not, you know, understanding what it was. And I said, no. Followership is the effective demonstration of leadership. And if there's disgruntledness, like, you know, Dave was saying, is the players felt completely unmoored from the communication process. It seemed like the leaders just could operate with impunity and do whatever they wanted. And there's really big voice there. In followership is there's the sense in that group, could possibly have been just, okay, well, how is this operating? Now we're not listening to it, and we'll just challenge everybody to get in line or buy in or get on board. Or those are things that I just think that we're just trying to get control of it rather than fostering effective followership. Because like Rich said earlier, and Dave, you did as well, when the different roles kind of rotate, right? You got the emotional leader, you got the tactical leader, you've got the person at the end who's like, okay, everybody look at them, right? Her voice is the most important one for the last 30 seconds of each of the practices. It's like, okay, so, but effective followership is not the sense of being removed from that, but the autonomy of adopting the values, right? And in adopting the values, now they're being delivered by this person. If they're not effectively delivered by this person, then I have a voice. I expect something from leadership. And as Dave mentioned too, it's like, okay, well, if I have that, then what do you think you can do to improve that? How do you think we can improve, communication? How do you think we can improve connectedness? You're feeling disconnected. Let's talk about that, right? So what are your takes on having the voice or listening to that voice of followership as a unified entity as a way to evaluate effective leadership?
Yeah, this is the gold star point for me, Matt. I think you did a great job of leaving the most important thing at the end, because I think this is it. Because I think that when I've started to have connection with true leaders, they understand followership. And I think the best cultures I've had understand the roles of both. And especially if you're going to be someone, as we talked about, have different leadership in different areas, then you have to understand that you make a choice that if you choose not to be a leader in this area, you are choosing to be a follower. And again, follower is not a sign of weakness. It's going to be supporting and helping out, contributing to the team under the leadership of the leader. And I think for me, always though, the most important point that I can't stress enough is the athlete has to choose, am I going to be a leader or a follower? They do not have the option to choose, I'm going to do nothing. Because that person that chooses that, well, I'm not going to lead, I don't like that, I don't want to follow either, I'm just going to stay here. That's going to be a weight that's going to hold you down and not let you go forward. If you think of it as, a group marching along the field, leaders in the front, followers in the back, if that nothing is there, you're only going to go as far as that last person. And I think that's where I try to stress it over and over again to the followership, is that you have to make a choice, and you do have choice in this, and you do have a voice. That if you want to talk about the leadership, then we have a structure set up where I will take that feedback in, but you have to contribute to be a part of that. And I think that's the part that I believe has the most impact in that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Like that middle ground is messy. Yeah, I think choosing, being assertive, and establishing your role, accepting your role, not in a way that's you feel crushed and you feel like you have no choice, but choosing to contribute to the team in the way that the team needs you. I think it's very important. Definitely.
It's the way that cultures will have success, is that there has to be a collective that has to move down the path. But again, there has to be an active involvement in all roles, and roles can change and roles can grow. But I think the choice to follow, if I'm choosing not to lead, that takes a lot of ownership. That takes the same amount of buy-in. That's a big role to accept. But if you have people that will say, hey, for me to contribute healthy to this team, to make it better, I'm going to support you. I'm going to support leadership. That's massive. The power of that for the leader and for the collective, that stuff that you find that in every successful team culture, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's
Go ahead, Rich.
I was just going to say there's many, examples you could use, there's many parallels to draw, like there's, small things can make a big impact, and, you can make many examples and draw many parallels to that, someone's role on a team, so they choose to accept. So I think, it's important to, point it out to them that everyone's role is important.
Yeah, and that's is almost exactly what I was going to say, Rich, is drawing attention to it. That's that sense of responsibility. If you're sitting in that I'm not going to lead, but I'm not going to be a follower, and I'm going to stand here, then the degree of responsibility that you're taking at that point is like a 1 out of 10, right? You're actually not taking responsibility for something. And as a result, now I can, and this is where I think the term accountable is misused, is to say, you're accountable to this. The athletes come back to that as always, no, I'm not, but that's not public. It's just in their own heads. We haven't given them an opportunity to go, what's a 2 or a 3 for that degree of responsibility? Try this role on. And you mentioned it, both of you have mentioned it, is notice when they're doing it, because their degree of responsibility has grown the same way that the degree of skill has grown, the same way that the degree of strength has grown. But we don't always do that with the mental side, right? And when you frame followership, the importance of it is, if I catch them doing good followership, right? Then how is it demonstrated today? How is it demonstrated today? And now the follower, but that's not a passive role, is drawing attention to the effectiveness, right? I want to be a quarterback on a football team. Okay. Now there's only one quarterback in that position. You can't have 3 people under center. So just by nature, you're now in a followership role over here, waiting for your turn, so to speak. If I'm demonstrating ineffective followership over there, I'm messing around with my teammate, I'm screwing around, right? It's not just, well, I'm not playing, right? I'm mentally, I'm emotionally, I'm not in the mind gym version of that, right? I'm just checking out. But my excuse is I'm not accepting responsibility. And I don't think anybody that, you know what, coach, I'm just not going to accept responsibility today. I don't think that's going to be, I haven't heard that. Have you heard that? I haven't heard that. Today I will accept no responsibility, right? That's why I don't think the term lazy athlete exists. I think an unmotivated athlete exists. I think there are passive people who are not athletes, but that's because they're not training. They're not exercising. They're not engaging. It's unmotivated. And if I'm unmotivated in that followership role, I don't like it. And that's why, if I'm hearing you right, Dave, that's what you're really hearing the athletes say, is that I don't like this. Okay. And I can shame them, pity party, right? Or I can go, what's a 1? What's a 2? What's a 3? Let's scaffold you out of here so that you can feel like you're contributing and your role is important. We need this. You wanted to be here for this. If that's not the case, what is it that you want from here? Right? There's a decision. So
I'll
soapbox rant.
The most combative environment I have as a coach of 18 to 23-year-olds, the most stressful thing that this gets tested on, and that is selecting a restaurant for the team to go eat a team meal at. And it keeps me up at night, because what's going to happen is we're going to say, where do you want to go? And they're going to say, I want to go to Subway. I want to go to wherever. I want to go to this diner. And there's going to be this group in the middle that's going to say, I don't care. I don't want to go. I don't care. I'll go anywhere. And then you get to the Subway, and then you have the arms crossed and the people upset. Why are we at Subway? And then you see the passion that I'm speaking about with this, because that's where it comes from. But that's as funny as that is, it's a great example of it, because it shows it right there. That person that's just now that didn't want to contribute to any of the options, that's going to sit there and just disrupt the whole thing because they're not happy with the restaurant that's chosen, is a great microcosm of how that can really kill a culture, and how all the focus goes on that one person that's going to stomp their feet and say, well, I don't like any of the options here, and they've done nothing to contribute. And that's something that I think that, that's a learning experience, but that shows you the power of it in a team culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great example. And I think it's the same for music choice. Like, hey, what music do you guys want? I don't know. I don't care. And I say, no. You got to pick something. Otherwise, I'm putting on hardcore gangster rap. Wow, not that. It's like, okay, well, make a choice.
So I hear the both of you saying there are no flaky people in your programs. None are allowed, right? It's just
they're empowered to make choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
decision making.
I think the big key, Matt, is, and you said it, is the followership is an active choice. There's an activity to it that you have to be active in this process. So you can not, not love the song or not love the restaurant, but if you're not contributing, then you're going to go with the group for the betterment of the group. And I think that's where the followership, that's where that coach that called you about, I don't want followers, they think of it as passive, but it's very active. It's very active to be a follower of a team. And that's why there's so much power into it.
I agree. Again, I love getting in these conversations, but I'm always conscious of time. What closing thoughts, guys? What would you want people who have decided to endure our entire video? What do you want them to walk away from with? Final thoughts, stories.
Yeah, for me, I would say the big one is trial and error, and every group is different, and these things are going to grow and expand. So, don't feel overwhelmed that if you lay this out and you've made mistakes, or if we've talked about things and given examples of things that you failed at, that's okay. It's just where I think the growth can come is keep trying to kind of, feel what's comfortable to you. And I really think, I'll go back to my very first point. I think if, as a leader in your program, if you can connect it to what's important to your values, you will have a grounding point for all adversity and all planning and everything going forward. And there'll always be an element that will be on the right path for yourself because it's going to be connected back to you. So I would say try things and explore and have conversations. And, none of us are sitting here saying that we're batting 1,000, that every team we've coached or every athlete we've worked has worked. That many have failed or haven't worked the way we wanted to. But the adaptability is what kind of keeps it going. So I would just encourage you to keep, take some ideas and try some things out and keep experimenting, and you will find what's comfortable to you as a coach and as a leader.
For me, it's if it's important to you, then take the time at the start to really set it up, whether it's that culture, the values, everything, and demonstrate it. Take the time to set up that structure, allow them to kind of take the mantle in those areas. But you have to set it up at the beginning and continue to adapt and listen, observe, and be honest. And take it from there, because I think those will allow you to have more success, in the middle and later in the season if everything is set up, from the beginning, taking that time.
Yeah, and I'd like to close on both of those points. Just like strength and conditioning, a well periodized plan means that you peak at the right times, and to feel like you've got to peak in the first 2 weeks because you've got to get your leaders in place is as Rich just said or alluded to, is not necessarily going to help that long term, right? In fact, ineffectively doing it at the start means that you probably in 8 to 10 weeks see some erosion of the very climate you're trying to establish. And if, to echo Dave's point, I think that's where we take responsibility as professionals to go, okay, if that's happening, I can't just blame them. I've got to look at what processes I ignored or didn't do or cut corners for, or, I just think that it's so valuable to do all that front end, but never feel like you have to do it alone, right? There's an abundance of expertise that pulling ideas and watching it, play out and wrestling with it is just assimilation and accommodation to one's thoughts, right? If I'm just going to jam in, the 37 principles, from the effective leadership book that I just read this summer, and I'm just going to hammer them out by putting them on a PowerPoint, making sure everybody can read them, and then getting upset when they're not done. Those are the kinds of breakdowns to me that it's like, well, did you pull in any of the other experts? Were there people that, no, you just specify this? Like, does my strength coach, have an input? Does, do my assistant coaches have an input? And did their input change my thinking? Oh yeah, totally. Like, when I look at those kinds of experiences, I think when we don't feel like we've got to do it alone, that we do the very things like at the front end that the two of you were talking about. I just think it's so much more powerful for effective leadership, as well as the development of a culture and followership across time. right? You do it less and less and less and less because you do it well here, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then all of a sudden you've got that climate, or you've got that culture that you're looking for. So I just, I want to thank the both of you for spending time hanging out and chatting about these topics. Closing thoughts.
I have no more thoughts. I think we covered everything. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much for getting us on here. It was awesome. It's good to talk about these topics. And yeah, great to see you guys.
Reach out, reach out, reach out, reach out.